You're listening to Northwoods Church Matters, a podcast of Northwoods Church in Evansville, Indiana, where we discuss why the local church matters and things that matter to the local church. I'm your host, Matt Higgins. Welcome back to the Northwoods Church Matters podcast. I'm here with Rachel Clark, who will soon be on staff here at Northwoods. Yay! And we're going to talk today about disappointment. And I know a lot of young people right now are dealing with disappointment that pretty much the whole school year, the end of the school year, has been canceled. Sports seasons have been canceled. Extracurricular activities have been canceled. Vacations have been canceled. Pretty much everything is canceled right now. I saw a meme on Facebook where the song from the Lego movie, Everything is Awesome. They just took out the word awesome and they put canceled. And that's pretty much the story of everybody's life right now. And so we're going to talk today about disappointment and how do you deal with disappointment in your own life, but also deal with disappointment in your kids' life, and how do you help them through a time like this where everything is canceled.
Here's our first question. On a spiritual level, why do we get disappointed?
Well, disappointment is really tied to expectations. And so I'm going to quote Proverbs here. Proverbs 13:12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life." Let me repeat that again just to take that in. Hope deferred makes a heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. So what that proverb is saying is what we know is true, is when we get our hopes and dreams fulfilled, it's really a joyful occasion for us. But when we have our hopes dashed and our hopes that are just thrown away or canceled, it just makes our heart sick. And the heart is the center of our emotions, the center of our being. And when our hearts get sick, it leads to all other things. It leads to worry, it leads to anxiety, it leads to anger, it leads to lashing out at others, it leads to gossip, it leads to a multitude of sins. So when our hearts are sick, our inner person is sick, it leads to a great variety of other sins. But disappointment really is all about expectations. Expectations really is a belief that something will happen in the future. I mean, like a common example is going out to the movies. Like you look on the internet, you see the times for the movies, and you set a time. You might even buy tickets in advance, and then when you get to the movie theater and you see the movie theater shut down, that's a disappointment because you expected something was going to happen and then it didn't happen. I remember going to the movie theater recently, and like we were watching a movie, and in the middle of the movie, the power cut off.
Oh no!
And it was a really slow Christian movie. I forget what it was. Oh, it was God's Not Dead 2, the sequel. And it was halfway through the movie, the power goes off, and when the power comes back on in like 15 minutes, it starts the movie back at the beginning. The beginning. And so we're like, we're out of here. Like, we're not going to watch like the entire movie over again. We'll catch it when it comes out on DVD.
And then skip through the part that you already watched.
Skip through the part that we haven't watched before. That's a good example of that.
The expectations always get me in trouble. So here's my thing. Is it good for us to have expectations? Should we have them? That kind of thing.
Well, I think expectations can be both good and bad, right? Like as Christians, we need to build our lives on the trust of the goodness of God as our Father. Like that's the foundation of our existence as Christians, is trusting and knowing who God is, and he has good in store for us, and we trust that in daily life. Like a good example of that is just going to sleep at night. Right. Like I can go to sleep at night and trust that I'm going to wake up the next morning because God is good. And the act of sleeping is actually the act of giving over your control to a higher power. We're trusting in him. And so we have expectations every day and the world runs on expectations. If we didn't have expectations, the world wouldn't work. There's order in the world, and there needs to be expectations. But sometimes expectations can be bad. For example, sometimes expectations are bad because we expect the world always to be well ordered. A great example of that is camp.
Yeah.
it's always going to rain sometime.
That's right.
When we go to camp.
Every time.
But the kids never expect it. They're like, oh, I was planning on doing zip lining, or I was planning on doing axe throwing, or whatever the case may be.
Going to the lake.
Or going to the lake.
And it lightnings and you can't do it.
Right. You just can't expect. I mean, the world is not perfectly ordered because we live in a sinful world. And sometimes expectations are going to be dashed because of that. But we have false expectations because of that. And then sometimes expectations are bad because we take God's good gifts for granted, like having a job and having money. And sometimes we waste time and we waste money and we waste things that we take for granted. And then when those things are taken away, we feel bad about it. And we should feel bad about it because we've taken advantage of God's gifts to us.
I think there's been like a lot of people who are just like super thankful now for like a lot of different things. And they're starting to realize like, I won't like be complaining as much because I realized like how valuable this is. Like even just like the job thing that you mentioned earlier, or I had a student and she was saying like, this makes me like never want to complain again about like face-to-face school because digital school is not fun. And so it's just like, you know, all of these expectations that we have that are now being like broken in some sense, like people are realizing it. And then they're also realizing now like how much we do have and take for granted on a daily basis.
Or church.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
How dare somebody come back and say church is boring? I mean, oh my goodness. Have you experienced online church? I mean, nothing against online church, but I mean, there's nothing that can compare with the privilege of gathering with people
right.
and worshiping together, which is what heaven is going to be like. Heaven is not going to be online.
Amen to that.
Thank goodness. Heaven is not online worship. I mean, heaven is literally us gathering. And so in some ways, this gives us kind of the aching for heaven, that we miss gathering with people for the physical presence of worship, and online can never compare to that. Sometimes expectations are bad because we're telling God what to do, or we have our own design for life and we want to tell God what to do. Sometimes this is like when our loved ones are sick, or when a family member is dying, we're trying to tell somebody what to do because we want the world to be like we want the world to be like.
It sounds like control.
The control issues, absolutely. Anybody out there have control issues? We're all raising our hands in the studio right now. But most often expectations are bad because we simply worship the wrong things. And that's when expectations are really bad. When we worship something other than God, or it's a higher priority than God. Like, for example, a lot of our kids and teenagers, they worship sports. And now some of them, their entire season is canceled. And so there is some sadness that goes along with that. But is the sadness simply because we're worshiping the wrong things, and we've got to examine our hearts because of that?
So I guess if that realization does happen, or if we're recognizing just how disappointed we are and how like unmet our expectations are, like how do people cope with that? Like, are there bad ways that you cope with those things that happen?
Yeah, there's let's go over the bad ways first. Let's talk about bad ways to cope with disappointment and unrealized expectations. Some people play what I call the expectations game. And the expectations game really is lowering your expectations so you won't get disappointed. And you see this a lot, especially with children of divorce. Like, I'm not going to raise my expectations and get my hopes up, because if I don't get my hopes up, then I'll never be disappointed. And it's like the child in a divorce setting whose father never shows up to the game that they really, really want them to show up to. All of a sudden, the kid starts lowering their expectations because they'd rather have low expectations than get their heart broken over and over again. And sometimes this is in marriage too. People lower their expectation of their spouse because they don't want to get their heart broken repeatedly. Some people get angry and lash out at other people instead of looking within and looking at their own heart, instead of saying, okay, this is partially my mess of my heart. It's looking to people outside and lashing out at those people. Some people blame God and question his goodness. I think that just because we don't get what we want doesn't mean that God doesn't care for us.
Right.
And I think that's a dangerous way to view things, that every time we don't get our own way, or our expectations aren't met, or a vacation is canceled, to say, why, God, do you hate me so much? I mean, that's just an awful way to look at life. God is good regardless of the outcome. And then some people look for affirmation of their feelings from people. And instead of seeking God and seeking his face and seeking what he says about the situation, we seek the guidance of other people and try to look good in their eyes. And that's what I'm talking about there, is social media. Like, what I really don't like is like the really oblique and like vague posts that people make, like, I'm having a really rough day, and looking for sympathy and looking for people to affirm their life
Or
situation.
the TBH that they always do, the to be honest kind of
Yes.
post, like, tell me what you think about me. And they're like, honestly, I think you're the most beautiful person in the whole wide world. And it's just like, what happened bad in your day that you're just looking for that affirmation kind of a thing?
Right, looking for affirmation of others versus other people. And every time adults hear that kids play the TBH game, they're just appalled. It's like, you mean you're not honest all the time? Well, no, adults aren't honest either all the time.
Okay, so now that we got the bad ways out of how, like, we typically run when we have disappointment or unrealized expectations, how should we actually handle that in a godly way? So how do we handle disappointment and unrealized expectations in a godly way?
Well, I think the first thing to do, especially if you're dealing with your own disappointment, is to ask the question, why? Why am I so disappointed? I mean, especially if we're lashing out, we're angry, we're worried, we're anxious. If negative emotions start cropping up, we really need to ask the question, what is going on in my heart that is causing me to be so angry or dismayed with the situation? Maybe it's that our heart is longing for the wrong things. And I think this is really true in this time. I think this is a really good time to look at our own hearts and our own idolatry in our lives. Disappointment reveals lots of things about our own hearts, especially what we're worshiping that's wrong.
Right.
And if we're grieving the loss of a sports season or band practice, or the loss of
Coffee,
Starbucks, yeah, vacation, KFC, I mean, whatever it is, if you're disappointed by not being able to do those things, the first place we need to look is in our own heart and say, is this thing in a wrong place? Do I have disordered desires where I desire coffee more than God, and that's why I'm so disappointed? And if that's true, we need to ask God to kill that desire. And I have a feeling God right now is working on a lot of people's hearts and killing a lot of people's
I think
desires.
it's even just like people like out of the norm too. Like just they're so used to just kind of their schedule. And I feel like in some sense God's kind of blowing that up.
Yeah.
And just like blowing it up in the sense of, hey, we're gonna, instead of you having this like, very comfortable routine, I'm gonna take you out of your comfort into this uncomfortableness. And it's that question of, what are we going to do with it? Like, why do we feel so uncomfortable to be at home with, because by now I'm sure people are tired of Netflix and Hulu, and they're tired of sitting on their couch or whatever. And it's like, what do you do now with that time? Mm-hmm. It's ask that question, why?
Yeah. And a lot of people worship work. I mean, I know a lot of men that their world revolves around their job. They could care less about being at home. And now it forces them to deal with the reality that their life does not revolve around work, and they have to worship what is right, which is God. But then a second priority is, you are the head of your household, and you should be spending time with your family. And so I think God is using this crisis to reorder our desires in the right manner. Another godly way to deal with disappointment is to place our hope in the right things. 1 Peter 1, 3-4 says this: by his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, unfading, reserved in heaven for you. And I really thought about that verse because it uses the words imperishable, undefiled, unfading. Like, all of our earthly hopes and desires, they will perish, they will be defiled, they will fade. Yeah. And our hope that is in heaven, which is Jesus Christ, will never do any of those things. So make sure we're hoping in the right thing from Scripture.
I think that's why God tells us to even like seek first his kingdom, right? Like
Yeah.
our citizenship is not this world. Thank the Lord, because then we would have coronavirus forever, like our citizenship is in heaven. Like it is where we belong. And I just think that, like what you're saying, like placing our hope in him, that's what we need to be doing.
Yeah. The older I get, the more I long for heaven, because, I mean, this world is so just hopelessly broken, and we need Christ to come back soon. Next thing we can do is lean on God's unbreakable promises. There's lots of things that you can point to in scriptures. That's a promise from the Lord. It will never be broken. I think one to lean on right now is 1 Corinthians 4:8-9. We are hard pressed on all sides. We are not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. Regardless of how bad this is and how bad this gets, we have a hope in heaven, and we will never get destroyed to the point where it will take away our hope that's in Jesus Christ. And then understand that everything's not going to go as planned. I think this is really critical. That if you're living in this life, you're going to suffer, meaning part of suffering is things are not going to go as planned, right?
Coming from a planner? Yes.
Yes, coming from a type A person. Yes. 1 Peter 5:10 says this, and after you've suffered a little while, the grace of the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. I love the term in that verse where it says, after you've suffered a little while. I think that's the right perspective. Yeah, we're going to suffer in this life, but compared to eternity, it's just a little while.
And I think, going back a little bit to what we talked about with expectation, we should expect that. We should expect that we're going to have suffering, and we shouldn't be surprised when it does happen.
Yeah.
In some sense, that's a healthy expectation, I would say, to expect suffering, to expect persecution to some extent in your life. And then, but the promise, like that he's saying here, is that he's got you, like he's going to restore you. Even if that comes in heaven, that you can hold tight to the fact that he's going to restore you together, that he's going to strengthen you. And God strengthens us in these crazy ways that we didn't even know we needed.
Yeah. I mean, for all of us, we're going to have an Alanis Morissette moment where it's going to rain on your wedding day. I mean, and whatever else the lyrics of Ironic are. I mean, there's bad things are going to happen. Not everything is going to be great in life. You're going to go through bad times and suffer. And that should be an expectation of you and your children. Yeah. Teach your children that in this life you will suffer. And that's a good thing to teach them. I think another thing that you can do in this time is just trust to the character of a good God. I mean, it may be, let me rephrase that. It's a good thing to trust in a good God. There's lots of things in this world that you cannot trust in, but you can always trust in the character of God. He is always for us. He's always for our good. And you can always place your hope in that.
And that makes suffering a little bit easier.
It does. Yeah. In the midst of whatever you're going through, God is good. And he has a plan, and nothing has caught God by surprise.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so right now, what are some practical ways that we can help kids during this time?
First, for the adults out there, I think we need to start by managing our own expectations and our own emotions. That you are not only contagious when you catch the coronavirus, but you are also contagious in your own emotions and your own feelings.
Your attitude is contagious.
Your attitude is contagious. It's coming from a teacher. Very good. Yeah, I'm sure you've probably said that before in a classroom setting.
Maybe just a few times.
Maybe just a few times.
I think I've heard it said that don't be like a thermometer.
Yeah.
Like where it's moving up and down. So you are not based on what the people that are around you. It says be the temperature. Mm-hmm. So like you set the tone. So like you set like the attitude, you set the like temperature. If you want it to be like hot, so to speak, if you want it to be encouraging and uplifting, like you can set that. It's not something that people are going to, and then people will be a thermostat hopefully and come to you when you're on that level. But don't be the cool person, like cold and cold hearted. You want to be the one that's like setting a good temperature for the room. And
so set the tone in your own household. I mean, watch what you say about certain life situations. Like if you say, I wish I could get out of here. I mean, that would really be a heart emotion that you're feeling right now, but watch how you're saying that to your children. And another thing is to tell your kids that it's okay to grieve. Tell your kids that they need to take a moment to grieve things that are disappointments in life and when things don't go right. but you need to move forward. Like I had a moment this week where, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, all the days are starting to
I
blur
know.
together. But when we started just canceling like everything for church,
Easter egg hunt,
Easter egg
Easter
hunt,
service, Good Friday
yeah,
service,
there's
everything.
lots of things that were just getting canceled left and right. And I just had a moment where I just kind of broke down and cried, and I wept over it because these are things that we put a lot of effort and a lot of planning into, and the Lord is going to use them. And I'm grieving over the fact that God isn't able to use those things for His good and His glory. But then after I've had a moment, okay, I've got to move on and I've got to move forward. I'll give them some time to grieve, but don't let them grieve forever. Tell them they've got to move forward from their grief.
How long do you think that should take, the grieving process? I know it's different for everyone, but I mean, we've been in this now for most people about 2 weeks. How much longer should they be grieving, or do you think that they should actually have an honest conversation about that and then kind of move on?
Well, I would say it's different in a death situation than like a sports schedule is canceled.
Right.
Because that saying is of you don't have to move on, but you've got to move forward. That comes from grief counseling. That's something I often tell people when they're grieving a loved one, is that you don't have to move on, but you have to move forward. Meaning that you don't have to forget the memory of someone or act like they never existed, but you have to. God still has plans for you, and you have to move forward with God's plans. And I think it's the same type of principle, but just on a lesser scale. Right. It's okay to acknowledge that, yes, that has been taken away, and to love the memory of it. But then that doesn't mean that in this time of coronavirus, God doesn't have other plans. And in terms of time frame, I would say make it short. I mean, as short as possible. I mean, have a moment, but don't let it drag on days and days and days and days.
And I think it's good to even just show like your family that there are other things that we can do, that like it's what we were going back to. It's not our whole world. It was a piece of it, but especially like when we're talking like sports, band, whatever it may be, that's in a season right now, going to the movies. I know Disney on Ice is canceled, and so like a lot of people were really excited about going to that. But it's just like, think about like, yes, we were really looking forward to that, but like, let's think of what are some things that, and maybe that's something you guys can do as a family, is like plan something out 2 or 3 weeks down the road that you're going to be able to do, and you can expect that you can do that no matter if it rains, no matter what the circumstances may be, but like plan something else that your kids can probably look forward to, that's going to happen. And that's not some like big concert or something like that. It's something that's attainable. Like, you can get that.
Like going fishing at the lake at Northwoods.
For sure.
You definitely can do things like that. And in the midst of that, just tagging onto that, I think it's important also not to set false expectations.
For sure.
And I know parents do this oftentimes to try to manage expectations of their kids, but I think it makes situations worse. Like when an event is canceled, then you immediately just say, "Oh, we'll do it again sometime," or "The next time that this comes around, we'll be sure to go." Well, you're setting a promise that your kid is going to remember, and believe me, as a parent, your kid remembers that you said that, and it sets you up for a situation potentially where you could be made into a liar in the future. It's better to say things honestly with your kids, is like, "This has been canceled. I'm sorry we can't go. The next time it comes around, we'll see whether this can happen, or we'll try to make this happen. I can't make any promises, but we'll try."
I think saying "I can't make any promises" should be like your go-to catchphrase. Like, it should just be a thing that parents can have in their back pocket as like a tool. Like, "I'm not going to make any promises. I'm just thinking of practical things, like you ran out of chicken nuggets." And it's like, "I promise we'll have them next week," but you can't go to the store. You know what I mean? Or like, if the store is out, you can't do that. So it's just like, like, I can't make any promises, but I'm going to be looking for chicken nuggets when I go out. But it's my goal, like, for you to have chicken nuggets, but I can't guarantee that.
Oh, I mean, how many times has that been set up for failure? Like, your kid's toy breaks, and you say, "I promise we'll get you a new one." Like, you're trying to manage their expectations, but you're promising something that you don't know is true. And then you go to the store and lo and behold, it's not there. It's out of print or it's out of stock or something like that. Then you're scrambling on the internet trying to find this thing that you promised that you're going to do. So watch out for false promises. Another way is to express your pride in their accomplishments. And what I mean by that is not like the sin of pride. What I'm saying is be proud of the accomplishments of your child that they've already done in this school year, especially when you're dealing with a child that's a senior and they may not get to walk a graduation stage or go to their last prom or those last moments of school. They may have already had their last moment of school and they didn't know it. But just take a moment and just let your kid know, especially your seniors, know that you're so proud of their accomplishments. And, this is something that I'm trying to do with Gwen right now. Just band is canceled for pretty much the rest of the year. Right. But I'm trying to let her know I'm proud of her and all of her accomplishments. She's done great work this year. And I want her to let her know, even if you can't do honors jazz band or river brass or some of the things that have been canceled, I mean, it's good to let them know that you are proud of them and what they've done. Another good thing is to don't miss major life events while you're at home. And so if your kid is going to miss a birthday, go and celebrate the birthday. I mean, don't say we'll have a party later. Go ahead and celebrate. And it may not be what they want, but make sure that the kids know that this is still a big deal for you. Or graduation, or even senior pranks or something like that.
I was thinking about this and I was like, there are tons of ways that you guys can be creative in the middle of all of this. Like, I'm thinking of like, if we don't know how long we're going to be canceled. We don't know if there's going to be graduation. We know that like some districts nearby have already canceled the rest of the school year. But I mean, let's just say we didn't have graduation. I'm like in my backyard. If I could, like I would set up like, like make a sign like congratulations, 2000 or 2020, and then have like a little stage set up, and then I would maybe dad gives like the opening remarks, and then mom gives like another speech, and then maybe you have siblings who like want to come in and talk or something like that. But I just feel like there's a way that and you can have like a graduation ceremony, and I'm telling you, I think that would be probably more memorable to your student than anything else. Even if you have an 8th grader, I know that they've kind of started making 8th grade a big deal around here, just because you're about to graduate middle school and you're going on to the high school. You could do the same thing for something like that. And I know dances and senior prom and all that are a little bit different, but you can still find ways to make that special. What if you did like a virtual dance? I don't know. You could probably make some things up, but like if you have little siblings or something like that, you can there's ways to make these things special that are just not involving around the school. And to some extent, I think that's really cool because now the family unit is responsible for making their kids feel like important and proud, like you've talked about, instead of that weight being on the school. I think we've relied a lot on the school to kind of set up these big milestone moments for us. But when in reality, like the parents can be just as involved. I know that a lot of people already have, started writing little things on sidewalks and all of that stuff, but there are ways to, wish people happy birthday. There's this thing called mail that's still going around, and you can have, what I would do is if someone's celebrating a birthday, I would ask all of your friends and family to send them a birthday card in the mail on that day. And you could have like a, like a mail shower of all these different birthday cards and everything. And that could be so cool for your kids to feel special. I saw someone on Facebook, they had a drive-by parade on their birthday. Like that's awesome. They had like the kids sit outside and they like drove around. So there are ways, just be creative. It can still be a big deal without it being the way it always was. We just get to be creative now. So Pinterest is a good starting place.
Yeah. And especially in a time where people are isolated from each other, the U.S. mail is a great thing because I don't know if you know this out there on internet world, but your kids love mail because they never get it. They it's an obscure thing to them. Like I remember the time or the day when everything came via the mail, but when your kids get something via the mail, it's a big event. So like if your kids are graduating, ask all their friends and family to write them a letter, or just use the mail to your advantage. I saw this on the news yesterday, and I don't recommend doing this at all. But But I thought this was hilarious and a great example of parents that were being creative. And so there was a kid that was turning 21, and he was really looking forward to going out to a bar
Oh
on his
my.
21st birthday. And so his parents set up a bar in their garage, like with a disco ball and an actual bar and everything. And then the dad was outside checking his ID with a flashlight with sunglasses on. And then he went into the garage, and his mom was the bartender. And like she said to him, "We only have green tea." And so she wasn't serving anything alcoholic. But the whole fact that they were celebrating his 21st birthday, I thought that was hysterical. But kids will remember stuff like that. Now, don't set up a bar for your kids, but I mean, that is a way that parents are being creative in the situation. Um, then talk to your kids, ask them how they're doing. There's a danger in just letting your kids hang out on devices all day long in their rooms and they're isolated. Just talk to your kids and make sure that they're doing okay, that they're emotionally healthy. And then on top of that, make sure that they're unplugging intentionally. There's a tendency for all of us just to be addicted to Netflix and Hulu and all this other stuff. Getting some vitamin D and getting exercise really is important. So I see a lot of people out there on Facebook taking advantage of parks, going walking in the neighborhood, coming to the Northwoods Lake and doing some fishing. Make sure you're still getting out of the house in this time because it's good. Physical health is good for our emotional health and our spiritual health as well.
And I think that there are ways that, you can even point out just like family time. And this is going to be so good. Play some board games. Like
Yeah.
I remember playing Monopoly one time. And I know a lot of people dread that game because it takes so long. But we had it set up for 3 days during the snowstorm, like way back when. And that's like one of my favorite memories of like, just getting to play Monopoly for so long or Battleship. Like pull out all of your board games and just like have a board game night and make it a big deal. Like maybe that's the expectation you set on next Tuesday, or whatever day it may be. You're going to set up a time where you're going to do something and you're going to make it a big deal. And if they're all like begrudgingly because you have a bunch of middle schoolers who, don't want to spend any time together, then you're just going to unplug their phones and unplug their Netflix, and you can freeze Netflix accounts and Hulu accounts for a day or something like that. At least I'm pretty sure you can.
You can.
And so like there are ways to, make it to where they don't have access to where they have to calm down. And I guarantee you they're going to have so much fun. They may hate it for the first couple of minutes or whatever. You may hate it too because you're miserable, but just because of their attitude. But remember, you set the temperature. So if you set it, this is going to be fun, this is going to be awesome, they're going to buy into all of that, and it's going to be really, really good. Just be creative. Use this time to like, to just spend time with your family and expect family time and use it intentionally because this is God-given. When is this ever going to happen again? Like chances of it where our lives are intentionally slowed down, we don't know when that could happen again. And I just feel like we should see this as a blessing in some sense and not a curse that we have this time to just be together.
Yeah. And make the small events into the big events.
Right.
I mean, this is an opportunity. There's not a lot of big thing that's happening. You can't fly to Boston. You can't take this massive vacation. You can't go to Holiday World. But turn the small things into the big things, whether it be having lunch. I mean, keep on a schedule. Or going out to Popeyes and grabbing a chicken sandwich. Or going out to Chick-fil-A. Or going to make a Target run. Or whatever the case may be. Make that the big thing. Pump it up and make those small things into big things. And just try to stay on a schedule, too. Your kids need scheduling. And when they're off schedule, bad things can happen in everybody's life. So make sure you're keeping a schedule.
I think even with your middle school and high schoolers, because I feel like a lot of people listening could say, this is really great advice for people with little kids. And that's true. But I think that what we can't forget is that our middle school and high schoolers and us, even as adults, we want to be like little kids too. Like we want to go outside and play with the sidewalk chalk. We want to go outside and we want to play horse, like all of these games that we think are for little kids. No, I guarantee your middle schooler and high schooler has just been playing the I'm too cool for that card too long. And it's time that we show them that being a little kid, having fun with this kind of stuff is a good time. I would not advise this, but TPing, because toilet paper is such like a hot commodity, but senior prank, TPing could happen. So Matt, maybe you should watch out.
I could find TP at Aldi's all the time now. I think the crisis is now over. But I think just to tag on what you said, I think I think middle school and high school kids are probably the hardest hit by this.
Yeah.
That they're of the age group where they are disappointed the most, where they start veering into idolatry. When we see kids enter into those middle school years, they start wrapping their identities up into an activity. And they start asking the question in these times, well, if I can't be a dancer, then what am I? If I can't be a sports star, what am I? If I can't play soccer, what am I? If I can't go hang out with my girlfriend, what am I? All their world suddenly being is and their identity is wrapped up in these things they're involved with. And when you strip all that away, it can lead to some real serious depression and problems in your kid's life. And so definitely check up on your middle school, high school kids right now, because they're probably right now a week and a half, 2 weeks into this stuff with more weeks to go, just really, really struggling with this whole concept of everything is canceled right now.
Yeah. I'm a words of affirmation person. And so my last words of affirmation to our people listening would be to write a note to those middle school and high school students. I think that if you can figure out a way to encourage them and let them know, kind of like what Matt was saying earlier about like their what they're really good at, what you're proud of them at, and just like write that down, take the time to actually write that out. Maybe you even mail it to them from your house. That could be kind of cool. And just like letting them know that you see them and that you're proud of them. I think that's going to speak like so much to their heart and soul. But then also just like sitting down and having that conversation with them, letting them know that like you care and their friends aren't their entire world. Because we've seen that a lot, like on the live stream that we've been doing on Wednesday nights with our Fight Club students, like even just that little bit of interaction that they have just like hearting a zillion times on the Instagram feed, it means a lot to them because they're getting to like see and hear from their friends, and it's intentional. But just like checking in on them and letting them know that like things are going to be okay. And then just using this time to really just like build them up and encourage them, because I think they need way more encouragement than we even realize, and letting them know like, hey, you're so good at baking cookies. Why don't we bake together? Not just putting it on them to do the job, but do it together. Even if you're not very good at it, just spending that time figuring out ways that they can do it, figuring out ways for them to be leaders even now, and practicing those leadership skills. I think all of that is really, really good.
Yeah. I'll say, just to wrap up, that the key idea here is really that disappointment is a heart issue. It's a counseling issue. And this is a time which is good to re-examine where your heart's priorities are. And so if your kids are struggling with disappointment, the first place to go is directly to the heart, and to see whether there is idolatry there, whether we're worshiping the wrong things, whether we have desires that are disordered, and then think about how do we reorder them in the right order. All right. Don't go TP my house. Please don't. If you do, save a few squares for me inside.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks for joining us today on the Northwoods Church podcast. If you'd like some more information on our ministry at Northwoods Church in Evansville, Indiana, please visit us online at www.northwoodschurch.org. Again, that's www.northwoodschurch.org. We'll see you next time.